Instances of high strangeness and Lake Michigan. They just go together like ice cubes and lemonade. Sometimes, in the sweltering Great Lakes summertime, we get a rare taste of all four. Hello and welcome, my freshwater friends, to episode 4 of the About the Water podcast, an exploration of high strangeness on and around the Great Lakes. Today we take a walk along the eastern shores of Lake Michigan through the iconic and legendary town of Manistee, Michigan. Manistee is home to many ghosts, myths, and legends. But in this one particular story of high strangeness, we may find our very definition of high strangeness challenged, as its retelling forever echoes about the water. Episode 4, Lemonade. In stark contrast to Manistee's dark and brutal winters, the mid-July heat was unbearable. The air was stagnant and sticky. 27-year-old ghost hunter Margaret Miller was seeking one feature that many haunted landmarks don't have: air conditioning. She had explored some of the local cemeteries, ghost hunting equipment in hand, with little to show for her efforts. The random EMF spiked, but nothing concrete. She had no idea how far she was from where she parked her car, and now found herself lost in a maze of residential streets. Back in 2003, smartphones were a rare commodity, so Google Maps was not an option. Increasingly frustrated and increasingly dehydrated, she found herself in dire need of directions back to the middle of town. A born introvert, Margaret hated the idea of approaching a stranger for help, but her options were increasingly limited. Except for a vague feeling that maybe she recognized this street, she was lost. As she paused for a moment to catch her breath and regain her composure, she was startled by the voice of a young child. "I think you need a lemonade," the voice proclaimed. Margaret turned around to find a young girl sitting behind a table on the sidewalk. Taped to the table was a homemade, handwritten sign: "Lemonade, 2 cents." "Fresh squeezed," the girl taunted, gently shaking a sweating glass pitcher, full to the top with bright yellow lemonade. Margaret approached the table, reaching into her shirt pocket for a small fold of singles that she had brought with her for parking. The little girl's eyes widened as she asked Margaret if she was rich. Margaret laughed. "Far from it," she said, asking the girl if she could make change for $1. The little girl grinned, looking down while stirring her pitcher with a wooden spoon and asking suspiciously, "You're not from around here, are you?" No," Margaret offered, digging out a nickel and fanning away the scorching heat. She then explained to the little girl that she would never recoup her costs, let alone make a profit by charging so little for a glass of lemonade. It was the first time she had used her economics degree in years. Dripping with sweat, Margaret told the little girl that she was betting business was pretty good today. The little girl grabbed the nickel and handed her a hearty paper cup filled to the brim. "Nope, just you this time. Let me get your change," the girl said. Opening a small wooden box, the little girl began to dig through some various coins. She handed Margaret 2 pennies back, and as she continued to rummage, assured Margaret that she would find the right 3rd penny quickly. Distractedly dismissing her, Margaret made a proposition. She told the girl that she could keep the 3rd penny if she could help Margaret find her way back to First and Cypress, where she had parked her car. The little girl cut her off. "You're a long way from your car, lady. Don't worry, she can help you." Without looking, the girl motioned towards the house behind her, continuing to dig through the box. With a confused thank you, Margaret turned towards the home. "I'll have your change in 1 second," the little girl said. Margaret downed the lemonade with a single gulp, and cautiously stepped up onto the porch, knocking on the front door. An elderly woman peeked through a curtain on the window, with a look of disbelief washing over her face. She disappeared back into the living room for a moment and returned with a smile, opening the door. Margaret introduced herself politely, explaining that she was lost and needed directions to First and Cypress. "The little girl out front said you might be able to help me?" Margaret said. There was a brief moment of awkward silence until the woman shook her head in bewilderment. "I knew you'd be back," the woman said. With a closed fist, she reached out and with her free hand gently grabbed Margaret's, placing an object in her palm before closing it. Looking Margaret directly in the eyes with a big warm smile, the woman patted her hand. "Down the steps, take a left. You're almost back." Confused and a bit frightened, Margaret took a step backwards, nearly falling off the porch. Without another word, the elderly woman closed the door, kindly smiling all the while. As she turned around, Margaret then realized that the little girl and her lemonade stand were completely gone, as well as the empty lemonade cup that Margaret had been holding just a moment ago. Margaret did not give herself time to process the strange series of events. Instead, she walked at a brisk pace in the direction that the elderly woman had indicated, and within minutes she arrived at her car. It wasn't until Margaret reached for her keys that she realized her fist was still clenched tight. She slowly opened her hand, revealing the object that the elderly woman had given to her. The rest of her change. One more penny. Shiny. Brand new. Margaret quickly reached into her pocket to locate the other change that the little girl had given her. Sure enough, there they were. Shiny, mint condition, brand new. All three dated 1937. To this day, speculation is the best that Margaret can do, trying to explain her walk that afternoon. Each member of the small group of friends and family in which this story circulates have their own theory. And as I'm sure you'd agree, we're all kind of left to our own conclusions. It does present an interesting lesson, however, in the world of high strangeness. How quick we are to assume that we are normal and that strange events happen to us. We assume cryptids or UFOs are from another world, or that the apparition we saw was something that simply didn't belong here. But perhaps the lost souls and ghosts that wander these haunting tales around the Great Lakes are in fact alive and well in their time. And it is we who are the apparitions. Most of the time, I try to approach these stories of high strangeness with a fairly open mind. But when Margaret finished telling me this story, I kind of had my doubts. And I think she could sense that because she did produce the 2 pennies that the little girl had given her. And indeed, they were 2 Lincoln pennies, both from 1937, both in eerily excellent shape. And it wasn't until she produced the 3rd one, the penny that the old woman had given her, that I really started to believe. A 1937 wheat penny, being carried around in Margaret's pocket, with a market value today of just over $15,000. And even though Margaret did admit she could use the cash, she said that penny will remain with her forever. A memento from one of her ghost hunting trips that finally, and quite literally, paid off. And with that, thank you sincerely for listening, and for inviting me to share in your adventures as you travel through your own story. May it be as grand, beautiful, and enduring as our Great Lakes. I'll see you about the water.